The snow crunched under Jinho's boots as he stepped outside his mountain research station for his morning equipment check. The wind was brutal today, cutting through his thermal jacket like it was paper. He had chosen this isolated peak on the edge of human space for exactly this reason. No visitors, no distractions, just him and his engineering projects. But something dark against the white snow caught his eye. At first he thought it might be debris from a crashed shuttle or maybe equipment blown off course by the storm. As he got closer, his heart nearly stopped. It was a person. No, not a person. An alien, but humanoid enough that his brain processed it as someone in desperate need of help. She was curled in a tight ball, her blue-tinted skin almost matching the color of the snow around her. What made Jinho's blood boil were the metal restraints around her wrists and ankles, crude, industrial-looking things that had clearly been cutting into her flesh for a long time. Even unconscious and half-frozen, she was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with elegant features and silver hair that caught the morning light. Jinho had seen those restraints before during his military days. Hegemony slave traders used them on their most valuable merchandise, but that made no sense. This woman was clearly Vorthani. He could tell by her bone structure and the faint ridges along her temples. The Vorthani were legendary warriors, each one worth more than most people made in their entire lives. Why would anyone abandon something so valuable in the middle of nowhere? Questions could wait. She was dying. He scooped her up, surprised by how light she felt despite her tall frame. Her skin was ice-cold even through his gloves, and her breathing was so shallow he had to check twice to make sure she was still alive. Back in his station, he laid her on his medical table and cranked up the heat. The restraints had to come off. First, Jinho grabbed his plasma cutter and carefully sliced through the metal bands. The moment they fell away, she seemed to breathe a little easier. Dark bruises circled her wrists and ankles, where the metal had bitten deep. Someone had kept her chained for a very long time. Working quickly, Jinho pulled out his emergency medical kit. He had basic supplies, nothing fancy, just human medicine designed for human biology. By all logic, none of it should work on an alien. But as he applied synthetic skin patches to her worst wounds and injected her with general antibiotics, her body seemed to respond. Her breathing steadied, and some color returned to her blue-tinted skin. While she slept, Jinho couldn't stop staring at her. Every scar told a story of cruelty. Someone had treated this incredible being like an object, like property to be used and discarded. The thought made him sick. In his military days, he had seen the aftermath of hegemony raids, entire families sold into slavery, communities destroyed. But seeing it up close, seeing one victim fighting for her life on his table, made it personal. Hours passed before she stirred. When her eyes finally opened, they were the most striking shade of violet he had ever seen. For a moment they just looked at each other, the human engineer and the abandoned warrior, two beings from different worlds whose paths had crossed. In the most unlikely way, she tried to sit up, winced, and fell back down. Jinho gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Easy," he said softly. "You're safe now." But even as he said the words, Jinho wondered if they were true. Someone had left her here to die, and something told him they might come back to finish the job. 3 days passed before she could sit up without wincing. Jinho had been patient, bringing her water and simple foods, checking her bandages, never pushing for conversation. But he could see the questions burning in her violet eyes every time she looked at him. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse. "From disuse." Her accent was strange, but her Korean was surprisingly clear. "Why help Asset 9901? Jinho paused while adjusting her blanket. "Asset what now?" 9901. "My designation." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I am Asset 9901, property of the Hegemony Trading Consortium, Warrior Division." The casual way she referred to herself as property made Jinho's stomach turn. "That's not a name, that's just numbers." She tilted her head, genuinely confused. "Names are for owners to give property. I am defective property. No owner wants defective merchandise." "Defective how?" Jinho sat down in the chair beside her bed, trying to keep his voice gentle. For the first time, something like shame crossed her features. I refused final evaluation. The target was a family, mother, father, small offspring. I was ordered to eliminate them to prove my conditioning was complete. She stared at her hands. I could not. The sight of the young one hiding behind its mother, something inside me broke. I lowered my weapon. Jin-Ho felt a surge of respect for this warrior who chose compassion over survival. So they threw you away because you wouldn't murder children? Defective merchandise has no value. Better to dispose of it than waste resources. She looked at him with those haunting violet eyes. But you waste resources on me. Food, medicine, warmth. Why? What do you gain? The question caught Jin-Ho off guard. In her world, every action had a price. Every kindness came with strings attached. How do you explain basic human decency to someone who had never experienced it? I don't gain anything, he said simply. You needed help. I could help. That's enough. She stared at him for a long moment as if he had spoken in an alien language. This is kindness without payment. Yes. Without ownership. Yes. Without expectation of service. Jin-Ho nodded. Without anything. Just because you're a living being who deserves to be treated with respect. Tears began forming in her eyes, the first emotion other than fear or confusion he had seen from her. I do not understand this concept. You don't have to understand it, you just have to accept it. Jin-Ho leaned forward. And the first thing we're going to do is get you a real name. Not a number, not a designation. A name that belongs to you. How does one choose? Jin-Ho smiled. Think about what you want to be, not what others made you. What feels right? She was quiet for several minutes, testing different sounds on her tongue. Finally she spoke. Nari. In your language it means flower, yes? The white one that grows in clean water. Lily, Jin-Ho confirmed. It's perfect. Nari, she repeated, and for the first time since he found her, she almost smiled. It is strange, owning something that is mine alone. Get used to it, Jin-Ho said. You're going to own a lot more than just a name. You're going to own your choices, your future, your freedom. Nari looked down at her scarred hands, then back at him. And if they come for their defective property? Jin-Ho's expression hardened. Then they'll have to go through me first. Something shifted in Nari's eyes. Surprise, gratitude, and maybe the first spark of hope she had felt in years. Over the next week, Nari grew stronger, but Jin-Ho noticed strange things happening around her. Electronics would flicker when she got emotional. His coffee mug had moved 3 inches across the table while she was staring at it intensely. Once, when she had a nightmare, every light in the station dimmed simultaneously. Nari, Jin-Ho said one morning while she helped him organize his tools. Can all Vorthani do? Unusual things. Her hands froze over a wrench. What do you mean? Yesterday, when you were concentrating on fixing that broken scanner, it just started working again. You never touched it. Nari set down the tool carefully, her shoulders tense. You should not have seen that. But I did, and I'm not afraid if that's what you're worried about. Jin-Ho sat across from her. I'm curious, what aren't you telling me? For a long moment she said nothing, then, very quietly, my birth name was not Nari. It was Lyrele Vorthak, last daughter of House Vorthak. Jin-Ho's eyebrows shot up. Even isolated on this mountain, he knew that name. House Vorthak had been legendary, the most powerful noble family in Vorthani space until they were wiped out in a mysterious attack 5 years ago. Last daughter, he repeated. Meaning I am the only one left. Her voice was hollow. My parents, my brothers, my entire bloodline, all dead. Except me. How did you survive? Nari's hands began to glow with a faint blue light, and Jin-Ho felt a strange tingling in the air around them. Because I was already gone. Sold into slavery 3 months before the attack. The hegemony told my family it was a cultural exchange program. Lies, of course. The pieces clicked together in Jin-Ho's mind. They kept you alive on purpose. Yes. House Vorthak carried a genetic trait, psionic abilities that appear once every few generations. I am the first in 300 years to manifest the gift. She gestured, and his coffee mug slid smoothly across the table to her hand. The hegemony. Spent years trying to break my mind, to turn me into a weapon they could control. But it didn't work. Nari shook her head. They thought my compassion made me weak, made the abilities useless. But they were wrong. The angrier I became at injustice, the stronger the power grew. The more I cared about protecting innocence, the more precise my control became. My moral compass didn't diminish my abilities. It focused them. Jin-Ho leaned back in his chair, processing this revelation. So when you refused to kill that family, I proved I was unbreakable. They could torture my body, chain my limbs, but they could never chain my conscience. She met his eyes. That terrified them more than any weapon. A chill ran down Jin-Ho's spine as the implications hit him. Nari, if you're this valuable, if you're the last of your line with these abilities, they didn't abandon you. What do you mean? Jin-Ho stood up, pacing to the window. The mountain peaks stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and isolated. Too isolated. Think about it. They leave the most valuable person in the galaxy outside a random human's cabin, in the middle of nowhere? That's not disposal. That's placement. Nari's face paled. You think this was planned? I think they're watching. I think they wanted someone to find you, to take care of you, to let their guard down. Jin-Ho turned from the window, his expression grim. I think we're both bait now. As if summoned by his words, a distant rumble echoed across the mountains. Not thunder, engines, multiple ships getting closer. Nari stood slowly, blue energy crackling around her fingers. Jin-Ho, I am sorry. I have brought death to your doorstep. But Jin-Ho was already moving, pulling weapons and equipment from hidden compartments around his station. Don't apologize. Just get ready to show them what happens when they underestimate human stubbornness. The rumble grew louder. The ships landed in a circle around Jin-Ho's station, kicking up clouds of snow and ice. Through his reinforced windows, he counted 6 heavy transports and twice as many armed soldiers in black combat armor. At the center of it all stood a tall, pale figure in an expensive coat, clearly the one in charge. A voice boomed across the mountainside through external speakers. Human, I am Overseer Vex of the Hegemony Trading Consortium. You have something that belongs to us. Return our property, and you will be compensated for your trouble. Jin-Ho grabbed his communication device and stepped outside onto his station's platform. The wind whipped around him, but his voice carried clearly in the thin mountain air. I don't see any property here, just a free person who chose her own name. Even from a distance, he could see Vex's jaw tighten. Asset 9901 is valuable merchandise. Her genetic markers alone are worth more than your entire pathetic planet. Her name is Nari, Jin-Ho shot back, and she's not for sale. Behind him, Nari appeared in the doorway, her violet eyes wide with fear, not for herself, but for him. Jin-Ho, please, let me go to them. You do not understand what they will do to you. I understand perfectly. Jin-Ho didn't take his eyes off Vex. They'll hurt an innocent person to get what they want. That's not happening on my watch. Vex's laugh was cold and sharp. Innocent? She is a weapon, human. A weapon that belongs to us. You have 30 minutes to hand her over or we will take her by force. The transmission cut off, leaving Jin-Ho and Nari alone on the platform. Around them, the hegemony soldiers began setting up equipment. Energy cannons, shield generators, siege equipment designed to crack open fortified positions. This is madness, Nari whispered. I am not worth dying for. Jin-Ho turned to face her, and the determination in his eyes made her step back. That's where you're wrong. Every person is worth protecting. That's what makes us human. They rushed back inside, and Jin-Ho immediately began pulling apart his research equipment. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, connecting power cells to sensor arrays, rerouting energy conduits through his communication systems. What are you doing? Nari asked, watching him work. Turning this research station into a fortress. Jin-Ho's fingers flew over the control panels. These atmospheric processors can be converted into particle beam emitters. The weather monitoring system becomes a targeting array. The seismic sensors become motion detectors. Nari watched in amazement as the peaceful mountain station transformed around them. Panels slid away to reveal hidden weapon ports. The observatory dome split open to expose a rotating defense platform. Warning lights bathed everything in red. "You planned for this," she realized. "I'm an engineer and a former soldier. I always plan for the worst." Jinho activated the station's shields just as the first energy blast struck the building. The walls shook but held. Nari grabbed his arm. "Jinho, stop. This is wrong. I will not let you die for me." She started toward the door. "I will surrender myself. Tell them I escaped and came back voluntarily." Jinho caught her wrist gently but firmly. "Nari, look at me." She did, tears streaming down her blue-tinted cheeks. "Where I come from, we have a rule. We don't trade lives. We don't sacrifice one person to save another. We find a third option, or we go down fighting together. But you barely know me. I know enough. I know you chose compassion over survival. I know you'd rather face torture than hurt innocent people. I know you're brave and kind and deserve freedom." Another blast rocked the station, and I know that if I let them take you, I'd never be able to live with myself. Nari stared at him, overwhelmed by concepts she was still learning to understand. Outside, Vex's voice echoed again. "Time's up, human." Jinho squeezed her hand. "Ready to show them what happens when they mess with the wrong mountain?" Despite everything, Nari smiled. Together? Together. The siege began in earnest. The first wave hit like a thunderstorm. Energy blasts slammed into Jinho's makeshift shields, lighting up the mountain peak in brilliant flashes of blue and white. The converted atmospheric processors returned fire, sending particle beams streaking across the snow toward the hegemony positions. "Shields holding at 60%, Jinho called out, his fingers dancing across multiple control panels. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold air rushing through the ventilation system. Nari crouched beside him, her hands glowing with that familiar blue energy. "There are too many of them. Your defenses cannot hold forever." "Then we better. Make every shot count." Jinho targeted the nearest energy cannon and fired. The beam struck true, sending the weapon tumbling down the mountainside in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. But for every cannon they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The hegemony soldiers advanced steadily, using portable shields to deflect Jinho's return fire. Some were already scaling the rocky slopes, trying to find weak points in the station's defenses. "Jinho, behind you!" Nari shouted. He spun around to see 3 soldiers rappelling down from above, their weapons already charging. There was no time to bring the defensive systems around. Jinho reached for his sidearm, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Then Nari stepped forward, and everything changed. Blue energy erupted from her hands, not in wild, uncontrolled bursts like before, but in precise, focused waves. The energy formed a shimmering barrier between them and the soldiers. Their weapons fired, but the energy blast simply vanished into the barrier like stones dropped into deep water. "Impossible," Nari breathed, staring at her own hands. "I have never been able to maintain a shield this strong. What's different now?" Jinho asked, still firing at the advancing troops below. Nari's eyes widened with realization. "I am not fighting for the hegemony. I am not trying to hurt anyone. I am protecting someone I care about." The barrier flared brighter. "All those years they told me my compassion made me weak, but it is the source of my strength." The 3 soldiers above tried to find a way around the barrier, but Nari expanded it, pushing them back up the cliff face. With her defenses holding the high ground, Jinho was free to focus on the main assault. His targeting system lit up with dozens of enemy positions. The converted weather sensors tracked their movements with perfect precision, feeding data to his improvised weapons. Each shot found its mark, turning the hegemony's numerical advantage into a liability as their own equipment became obstacles on the battlefield. "This is incredible," Jinho said, watching Nari deflect an entire barrage of missiles with graceful waves of her hands. "You're not just protecting us, you're protecting them too. Look." Nari glanced at her barriers and gasped. Where her energy touched the soldiers, it wasn't harming them. Instead, it was gently pushing them away from danger, redirecting their weapons to fire harmlessly into the snow. Her subconscious desire to avoid unnecessary killing was shaping her abilities in ways the hegemony had never imagined possible. "Overseer Vex will not be pleased," she said with the first hint of satisfaction Jin-Ho had heard in her voice. Through the chaos, Jin-Ho's communication array finally locked onto a signal. His emergency beacon had been broadcasting for hours, and now something was responding. The display showed a familiar call sign, human military frequencies. "Nari, I think help is coming," he said, trying to boost the signal strength. "But we need to hold out a little longer." Another wave of soldiers crested the ridge, this time with heavier weapons. Energy cannons that could punch through starship hulls turned toward their position. Nari stood up, her entire body now glowing with soft blue light. "Then we hold." She spread her arms wide, and a dome of protective energy encompassed the entire station. The massive cannons fired, their beams striking the dome with enough force to level a city block. But the dome held, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Jin-Ho stared in amazement. "How long can you maintain this?" "As long as you need me to," Nari replied, though he could see the strain in her face. "I will not let them hurt you, Jin-Ho. You showed me what freedom feels like, now let me show you what I can do with it." What Jin-Ho didn't realize was that his emergency beacon wasn't just calling for help. It was broadcasting everything. Every word of defiance he'd spoken to Overseer Vex, every moment of Nari's incredible display of power, every second of their desperate stand was being transmitted across the galaxy's underground communication networks. On distant mining worlds, slaves, huddled around hidden receivers, heard a human engineer tell the mighty hegemony that a person's freedom wasn't for sale. In the labor camps of the Outer Rim, workers whispered about the Vorthani woman who chose her own name and fought back with powers fueled by compassion rather than hatred. "Sir," one of Vex's communications officers called out nervously, "we're detecting massive data transmissions from the human station. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies." Vex snatched the scanner from his subordinate's hands. The readings made his blood run cold. Their simple retrieval operation was being watched by millions across dozens of star systems. "Cut those transmissions immediately." "We've tried, sir." "The human's equipment is military-grade, heavily encrypted. It would take hours to crack, and by then what?" Vex's voice was deadly quiet. The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, we're receiving reports from Sector Command. There are uprising on 12 different worlds. Slaves are refusing to work, some are fighting back. They're calling it the Nari Rebellion." Inside the station, Jin-Ho was monitoring the same communications traffic, his engineer's mind working to decode the flood of messages pouring in from across the galaxy. "Nari, you need to see this." She maintained her protective dome while reading over his shoulder. Messages of hope and defiance filled the screen. From Mining Platform 7, "If Nari can choose freedom, so can we. We will not work today." From Agricultural Colony Beta, "The human shows us what real courage looks like. We stand with our brothers and sisters." From Transport Ship Destiny, "Nari's light shines across the stars. We are not property." Tears streamed down Nari's face as she read message after message. Her simple choice to accept Jin-Ho's kindness, to believe she deserved a name and freedom, had sparked something incredible. Across the galaxy, people were choosing hope over despair. "They know my name," she whispered in amazement. "People I have never met are saying my name." "Not just saying it," Jin-Ho replied, his voice filled with pride. "They're making it mean something. You've become a symbol, Nari. You represent everyone who refuses to give up." Outside, Vex was growing desperate. His personal communicator buzzed with angry messages from Hegemony Command. The slave revolts were spreading faster than they could contain them. Production had dropped by 30% in just 2 hours. Billions of credits were being lost. "Every minute, all units pull back to safe distance," Vex ordered through gritted teeth. "Prepare orbital strike coordinates." His lieutenant looked shocked. "Sir, orbital bombardment for one asset? The cost of letting this rebellion spread will bankrupt the entire consortium," Vex snapped. "Besides, we don't need the asset alive anymore. We just need to make an example, show the galaxy what happens to those who defy the hegemony." The massive warship hanging in orbit began charging its main weapons. Energy readings spiked as the bombardment system prepared to reduce the entire mountain to molten rock. Jinho's sensors picked up the energy buildup immediately. Nari, they're not trying to capture you anymore. They're going to destroy the whole mountain. Nari's dome flickered as the terrible realization hit her. To stop the rebellion. To stop the hope, Jinho corrected. They know that as long as you're alive and free, people will believe they can be free too. The orbital weapon reached full charge. Vex's voice echoed across the mountainside one final time. Let this be a lesson to any slave who thinks they can choose their own fate. Defiance brings only death. But even as the weapon prepared to fire, messages continued pouring in from across the galaxy. The rebellion was no longer about one Vorthani woman or one human engineer. It had become something bigger. A movement. That couldn't be stopped by destroying a single mountain. Jinho squeezed Nari's hand. Whatever happens next, you've already won. You've shown the galaxy that freedom is worth fighting for. Nari smiled through her tears. We have shown them. Jinho, this was never just my fight. Above them, the sky began to glow as the orbital weapon reached critical charge. The orbital weapon was 3 seconds from firing when space itself seemed to tear open above the mountain. Massive human warships dropped out of hyperspace so close to the planet that their engines shook the ground. Not just 1 or 2 ships, an entire battle fleet. More firepower than had been seen in this sector for decades. The lead battleship, HCDS Freedom's Voice, positioned itself directly between the hegemony orbital platform and the mountain. Its captain's voice boomed across all frequencies. Hegemony vessel, this is Admiral Kim Dae-sung of the Human Colonial Defense Network. Power down your weapons immediately. Overseer Vex stared at the massive human fleet in disbelief. Admiral, this is a private commercial operation. You have no authority here. I have all the authority I need, Admiral Kim replied coldly. You're threatening human citizens and committing acts of war against civilian populations. My orders are simple. Cease all hostile actions or be destroyed. On the mountain, Jinho and Nari watched through the station's telescopes as more human ships continued arriving. Cruisers, destroyers, even massive carrier ships loaded with fighter squadrons. The entire hegemony force looked like toys in comparison. Jinho, Nari whispered, why would your people risk so much for someone they do not know? Jinho smiled as he recognized the lead ship's markings. Because that's what we do. When someone calls for help, we answer. When someone fights for freedom, we stand with them. Admiral Kim's next transmission wasn't just directed at Vex. It was broadcast on every frequency, reaching billions of listeners across the galaxy. Citizens of all worlds, this is Admiral Kim of the Human Colonial Defense Network. For too long we have watched the hegemony treat sentient beings as property. Today that ends. The Admiral's holographic image appeared on screens throughout the fleet and across the communication networks. She was a stern-faced woman in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much injustice. 12 hours ago, we received a distress signal from Engineer Park Jinho, a human citizen protecting a Vorthani woman named Nari who had escaped slavery. Their courage in the face of overwhelming odds has inspired something beautiful. Images flashed across the transmission. Uprising on mining worlds, slaves breaking free from labor camps, entire populations refusing to submit to their oppressors. In the time it has taken us to reach this system, 12 worlds have declared their freedom. Millions of people have chosen hope over fear, dignity over submission. Vex's face had gone pale. His personal communicator was buzzing non-stop with emergency reports from across hegemony space. Profit margins were collapsing as their entire labor force rebelled simultaneously. The human stands down now, and we will consider this a misunderstanding. Vex tried desperately. Asset 9901 is valuable property. Her name is Nari. Admiral Kim cut him off sharply, and she is under the protection of humanity now, as are all the people fighting for their freedom in your territory. Behind the Admiral, tactical displays showed the scope of the rebellion. Red dots marked slave uprisings across dozens of star systems. The hegemony's entire economic foundation was crumbling in real time. You cannot protect them all, Vex snarled. The hegemony controls hundreds of worlds. Then we'll free hundreds of worlds, Admiral Kim replied without hesitation. The Human Colonial Defense Network hereby extends full protection to any being seeking freedom from slavery. Any attack on liberated populations will be considered an act of war against humanity. Jinho felt tears in his eyes as he watched the massive fleet spread out in protective formation. Each ship represented thousands of human lives willing to fight for strangers they'd never met, for people of species they'd never encountered, simply because freedom was a right that belonged to everyone. "Nari," he said quietly, "do you understand?" "What's happening?" She nodded, her own eyes wet with tears. "Your people are choosing to fight the entire hegemony. For me. For everyone like me. Not just for you," Jinho corrected. "With you. You started this rebellion. You showed everyone that freedom is possible. Now humanity is here to help finish what you began." On his communication panel, messages continued pouring in from the liberated worlds. But now they weren't just messages of hope. They were messages of victory. Slave camps were being opened, chains were being broken, and people were choosing their own names by the millions. The galaxy was changing, and it had all started with one human engineer who refused to let someone suffer alone. The surrender came, faster than anyone expected. Faced with the overwhelming human fleet and reports of collapsing operations across 12 systems, Overseer Vex's remaining forces threw down their weapons within an hour. The orbital bombardment platform powered down its weapons and prepared to be boarded by human marines. "This is not over," Vex snarled as Admiral Kim's soldiers placed him in restraints. "The hegemony has resources you cannot imagine. Allies who will..." "Who will what?" Admiral Kim interrupted, holding up a datapad. "We've been monitoring your communications, Overseer. Your allies are too busy dealing with their own slave rebellions to help you. Funny how quickly support disappears when your entire business model collapses." Jinho and Nari watched from the station's observation deck as hegemony soldiers were processed and their equipment catalogued. Among the seized materials were detailed records of slave routes, financial transactions, and client lists that would keep human investigators busy for years. "Look at this," Jinho said, scrolling through the captured data on his screen. "They have records going back decades. Every sale, every transport route, every world where they operated. This isn't just evidence, it's a roadmap to dismantling their entire network." Nari peered over his shoulder, her violet eyes scanning the endless lists of numbers and locations. Each entry represented lives destroyed, families separated, people reduced to property. "So many," she whispered. "I never imagined the scope was this vast." "But now we can find them all," Jinho replied. "Every slave camp, every hidden facility, every person still trapped in their system. Your courage didn't just free yourself, Nari. It's going to free millions of others." Admiral Kim's voice crackled over the communication system. "Engineer Park, Miss Nari, would you please join me?" "Aboard the Freedom's Voice?" "There are some people who want to meet you." The shuttle ride to the flagship felt surreal after days of siege and battle. Nari had never been on a human warship before, and she marveled at the efficiency and purpose of everything around her. The crew members they passed all nodded respectfully, not with the fearful deference she was used to from her time as a slave, but with genuine respect for what she had accomplished. In the Admiral's ready room, they found themselves facing not just Kim, but a diverse group of humans from different worlds and backgrounds. There were diplomats, military officers, civil rights advocates, and even former slaves from other species who had found refuge in human space. "Nari," Admiral Kim began, "what happened on that mountain has changed everything. Your story has reached every corner of human space and beyond. The Coalition Council has asked me to present you with something unprecedented." She gestured to one of the diplomats, who stepped forward with an ornate document. "Nari of the Vorthani, by unanimous vote of the Human Colonial Council, you are hereby granted full citizenship in the Human Colonial Republic. Not as a reward for your actions, but in recognition of what you've always been, a free person deserving of dignity and rights." Nari stared at the document, her hands trembling as she took it. I do not understand. I am not human." "Citizenship," Isn't about biology, said one of the advocates, a woman whose own alien features marked her as a former refugee. It's about shared values. You proved that freedom, compassion, and courage aren't human traits. They're universal ones. Jin-ho felt a surge of pride as he watched Nari carefully read every word of the citizenship document. Around the galaxy, he knew billions of people were watching this moment through live broadcasts. They were seeing a species that had barely known Nari existed, formally welcoming her as family. There's more, Admiral Kim continued. The intelligence we've gathered from Vex's forces has revealed the locations of 47 active slave facilities. The Human Colonial Defense Network is mobilizing liberation fleets to every one of them. Within 6 months, we estimate that over 2 million enslaved beings will be free. The room fell silent as the scope of that number sank in. 2 million lives changed because one engineer refused to abandon someone in need, and one former slave refused to accept her fate. What happens to them after they're freed? Nari asked quietly. Where will they go? What will they do? Admiral Kim smiled. That's up to them. But if they want it, they'll have the same thing you have now. A home with people who believe in their right to choose their own path. Nari looked around the room at the faces of humans and aliens working together, planning liberation campaigns and rehabilitation programs. These people had risked everything for strangers, committed their entire military to freeing people they'd never met. Jin-ho, she said softly, is this what hope looks like? Jin-ho nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. This is what happens when good people refuse to look away from injustice. This is what happens when someone as brave as you decides to fight back. 2 years later, the mountain that had once been Jin-ho's isolated research station buzzed with activity from dawn to dusk. Where snow had once stretched unbroken to the horizon, now there were paths connecting dozens of small buildings, gardens where alien crops grew alongside Earth vegetables, and the sound of children playing in languages from across the galaxy. Jin-ho stood on the expanded observation deck, watching a group of young Vorthani learning to control their emerging psionic abilities under Nari's patient guidance. Her teaching methods were gentle but effective. She helped them understand that their powers grew stronger when used to protect rather than harm, when guided by compassion rather than anger. Remember, Nari was saying to a nervous teenager whose hands sparked with uncontrolled energy, you are not a weapon. You are a person with a gift. The gift grows when you use it to help others. The boy nodded and tried again, this time successfully, lifting a small rock without crushing it. His face lit up with wonder and pride. Around him, other children of various species cheered his success, their different languages and appearances united by the universal joy of watching a friend succeed. The sanctuary had grown far beyond what Jin-ho had ever imagined possible. What started as his simple mountain station now housed over 300 beings from dozens of worlds, all former slaves who had found their way here, seeking the freedom that Nari and Jin-ho represented. Each arrival brought new skills, new perspectives, and new stories of survival against impossible odds. Director Park, came a voice behind him. Jin-ho turned to see Yun Min-soo, his assistant coordinator, approaching with her daily report tablet. Min-soo had been one of the first human volunteers to join their cause, leaving a comfortable job in the core worlds to help establish what everyone now called the Freedom Mountain Sanctuary. The morning reports, she said with a smile. Medical. Says all the refugees from the Kepler station rescue are healing well. Education has 15 new children enrolled in basic literacy programs and, she paused dramatically, the construction crews finished the new family housing complex yesterday. Jin-ho nodded, satisfied. The housing had been desperately needed. Families rescued from slave ships often arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs and trauma that ran generations deep. Having a safe, permanent place to call home was often the first step toward healing. Any word from the liberation fleets? He asked. 3 more facilities freed this week, Min-soo replied proudly. Admiral Kim reports that Sector 7 is now completely clear of hegemony operations. That's 41 sectors liberated since the rebellion began. Through the windows, Jin-ho could see Nari leading her students in a meditation exercise. Her blue skin glowed softly with controlled psionic energy, creating gentle patterns of light that helped the children focus. She had become something she never could have imagined during her years as Asset 9901, a teacher, a leader, and most importantly, a symbol of hope for beings across the galaxy. "You know what amazes me most?" Jinho said to Minsu as they watched the lesson. "It's not the military victories or the political changes. It's this." He gestured toward the courtyard below, where beings from a dozen different species were working together to prepare the evening meal. A massive Grokan, whose people were feared as warriors throughout the galaxy, was gently teaching a group of small Zenthari children how to knead bread dough. Former enemies and strangers had become family, united by their shared experience of choosing freedom over submission. The hegemony spent centuries convincing people that some beings were naturally superior to others, Jinho continued. They built their entire economy on the lie that some people were born to be property. But look at this place. When you give people the chance to be free, to be themselves, they create something beautiful. Nari approached them as her lesson ended, her students dispersing to other activities throughout the sanctuary. Her transformation from the broken, half-frozen being Jinho had found in the snow was remarkable. She stood tall now, confident in her own worth and secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. "Jinho," she said, "I have been thinking about something." "What's that?" Nari looked out over the sanctuary, watching children. "Play adults learn new skills, and families heal from old wounds. When you found me in the snow, you said you helped me because I needed help and you could help. That was enough." Jinho nodded. "I remember." "I understand now that this is not just human nature," Nari continued. "It is the nature of all free beings. When we are not afraid, when we are not controlled by others, our first instinct is to help those who need it. The hegemony had to break that instinct in people to make their system work." She gestured toward the bustling community around them. "This place exists because you refuse to let one person suffer alone, but it continues to exist because everyone here has made the same choice. We help each other because we can, and because it is the right thing to do." Jinho felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when he first decided to help a stranger in the snow. "So what happens next?" Nari smiled, and in her violet eyes, Jinho saw not just hope, but absolute certainty. "Next, we keep helping people, one at a time until no one has to suffer alone." As the sun set behind the mountains, the lights of Freedom Mountain Sanctuary glowed warmly against the snow. Across the galaxy, other sanctuaries were being built. Other liberation fleets were freeing the enslaved, and other people were making the simple choice to help when they could. The rebellion had become a revolution, and the revolution had become something even greater, a galaxy-wide awakening to the truth that freedom and compassion were not human traits but universal ones that could flourish wherever good people refused to look away from suffering. It had all started with one person, helping another in the snow. Now it would never stop. "Retry. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses."